Throughout the long history of college football, the top dogs have changed many times, or at least for the most part. Throughout the earlier years of college football, it was often the Ivy League schools that dominated the sport. Yale still has the most college football championships out of everyone. Princeton is in the top 3, while Harvard is still in the top 10. Then these schools essentially decided to demote their athletics in the pursuit for better academics. Now these same schools aren't even considered Division 1A in college football. But the Ivies aren't the only schools seemingly disappear from the forefront of college football. Although entire leagues aren't known to fade into obscurity, at least in college football, it isn't uncommon for schools in the largest college conferences to find themselves demoted out of the limelight. In fact, there are many schools that used to be a part of the power conferences that have been somewhat banished to obscurity. While many of these schools find a way to claw themselves back into the highest level of play, others just keep on slipping down until almost everyone forgets the value that they brought to the sport. And if I didn't make it obvious, I'm going to focus on the schools that got demoted, not the schools that moved on to better conferences. That is the topic for another video. Without further ado, let's begin. If we want to start at the beginning, then we have to go back in time to the oldest major conference in the college football world, the Big Ten. But not that Big Ten. Better, I guess. Even long before this logo was made, the Big Ten was known as the Western Conference, with the founding members of Illinois, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Purdue, Northwestern, and Chicago, the only team to leave the Big Ten. And why they did is a very interesting story. I'm going to try to make this relatively short, but Chicago wasn't bad at football. Not one bit. The Maroons won the Natty in 1905 and 1913, although that is disputed. And they did win the Big Ten title a dozen times. They even sported a guy named Jay Berwinger. I'm not sure if I said that right, I'm not sure I did it, but let's move on. He became the very first winner of the Heisman Trophy and was the very first overall pick in the very first NFL draft. However, not long after that, things kind of went downhill, as there's this guy named Robert Hutchins. Hutchins thought that sports were a distraction to academics and shifted resources away from the athletic programs and eventually managed to shut down their football program in 1939, thus causing them to eventually leave the Big Ten in 1946. Here's a fun fact. The world's very first nuclear reactor was actually made under the stands of the abandoned stadium after the football program was shut down. It was actually featured in the Oppenheimer movie. Chicago is now in Division III football and is a part of the University Athletic Association. Although this was the only team from the Big Ten, the other conferences have more than one. Let's move on to the SEC. The SEC has 3 teams I like to talk about: Sewanee, Georgia Tech, and Tulane. These 3 schools all were founding members of the conference and then proceeded to leave for different reasons. Starting off with Sewanee, also known as the School of the South. Although unheard of now as a Division III school, they were very prominent in the early days of college football. They in fact had one of the best seasons ever in college football history in 1899. They won all 12 games and won 11 of them by shutouts. They somehow did not win the national championship that year though. However, even by the time they entered the SEC, they were a shell of what they once were. They ended up being 0-36 in conference play in only 8 years as a conference member. The Tigers ended up being outscored 1,163 to 84. Because of their poor play, they left the conference in 1940. Also, they once had a huge rivalry with Vanderbilt. Again, they are now a Division III school, a part of the SAA. Next is Georgia Tech. And although they still are a Power 5 school, I decided to include them. Their story is different and unique. While in the SEC, they won the national championship in 1952, and outside of it, they won it in 1917, 1928, and 1990. They also won the SEC in 1943, 1944, 1951, and 1952. So unlike Sewanee, they were successful. So why did they choose to leave? This story comes down to that of Bobby Dodd, a successful coach from their football team at that time. He noticed that the conference's academic standards, especially in eligibility and recruiting, were very subpar. So when he spoke against it, the conference did the most responsible thing to do. Absolutely nothing. After that, he convinced Georgia Tech to leave the conference in 1964, and Georgia Tech eventually managed to fall into the ACC, where they are today. The last school I'll mention here is Tulane, who has actually been gaining a lot of steam today. Of these three teams, they did stay the longest, but not by much. The Green Wave did have some success, winning the SEC in 1934, 1939, and 1949. That in 1951, the university's president decided that the school was giving too much attention to athletics, and he left their football team to Mushmore State. You kind of see a pattern going on here. From there, the football team declined, and in 1966, Tulane left the SEC due to failing football team. It is also important to note that the school did try to start another conference called the Magnolia League. It was supposed to essentially be a southern version of the Ivy League, but the idea never took off. Now we cross the entire country to the Pac-12, where the story starts to honestly get a little less interesting. However, after the Pac-12, there are a lot of neat gems, so don't leave yet. I'm going to bundle the two Pac-12 teams together, though since there is a little less meat on the bones here, I'm going to make it brief. These two Pac-12 teams are Idaho and Montana. Idaho was a founding team that was booted out for being small when the conference decided to rebrand. One thing to note here is that Idaho does claim the Pac-12 title in the year 1927. Idaho was officially booted out in 1959. Montana was also another founding member, but they decided to leave themselves in 1950 after being outcompeted for a certain amount of time. And now they're one of the more successful FCS teams. Next is the teams that left the Big 12. We have the following schools in this one: Grinnell, Drake, and Washington, Missouri. Sounds familiar? That's right, because I made an entire video on this not too long ago that you should definitely watch. Anyway, if you do want a shorter story than that though, here's essentially the gist. The Big 12 used to be the Missouri Valley, and then this conference split with the smaller schools, continuing to carry the Missouri Valley name, while the larger schools would eventually become the Big 8, who would eventually don the name the Big 12 after merging with the Southwestern Conference. One thing to note here, because I'll talk about the Southwest Conference later, I'm basically considering the Big 8 the true predecessor to the Big 12. Just note that. And there's also these four schools too. However, I'm not really going to talk about them because they left for better conferences in their opinion. And I just really want to talk about the schools that got demoted. But I'll say where they went at least. Colorado went to the Pac-12 and almost immediately regretted it. Missouri and Texas A&M went to the SEC, and Nebraska went to the Big 10. Next is the ACC, where no schools were really demoted. We do have South Carolina, who moved on to the SEC, and Maryland, who moved on to the Big 10. And if you do enjoy this video, smash the subscribe button for more crispy content, and engage in the comment section. This is a young channel, so I, 1, am trying to build a community, and 2, am not perfect. Anything else I can do to make this and future videos better, please let me know. Now, we are not done. You may think that it was just the Power 5, but it wasn't always like that. And there are two more conferences that I'll discuss that do not exist anymore. The first one is the Southwest Conference. There are 5 banished teams in this conference. 2 I almost didn't include but decided to anyway. These are the colleges of Phillips and Southwestern. They were both there for a year as a full member in 1920 and 1915 respectively. If they stayed longer than a year, they would merit themselves a picture in the screen here. But alas, they don't. The first legitimate member is Rice. They had some success by winning the Southwest in 1934, 1937, 1946, 1949, 1953, and 1957. Then they declined in the 60s, only finishing as high as 3rd in the Southwest play once between 1964 and 1996. In my opinion, another academics over athletics school here However, they did technically win the Southwest in 1994, as did 4 other teams, making that a very messy year. Also, while Rice was in the Southwest Conference, JFK gave his "We choose to go to the moon" speech in that football field. After leaving, Rice bounced to the Conference USA, then the AAC. Not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Did that make any sense placing that quote there? No, I just wanted to use it. The next university is SMU, and what I think is the most interesting story today. So while in the Southwest, SMU won the conference in 1923, 1926, 1931, 1935, 1940, 1947, 1948, 1966, 1981, 1982, 1984. That was a lot. Had to take a deep breath there. They also won the national championship in 1935, 1981, and 1982. So they were very successful. However, in 1987, they received the death penalty for recruiting violations, and the team was disbanded for the 1988 season. In 1989, they started from square one. In the following years, they were just plain terrible. Then, the program's rebuild was very abruptly interrupted when the Southwest Conference disbanded. SMU then ended up in the WAC before ending up in Conference USA. They only have one winning season between 1989 and 2007. The program then moved to the AAC in 2013, mainly because they began to turn around in 2009. The team mustered their first bowl win since 1984 that year. After moving to the AAC, there was a lot of up and down seasons. SMU finally became ranked in 2019 for the first time since 1986, and recently announced their intent to move to the ACC in 2023. One could argue that they, in the long run, got an upgrade, but since they were kind of banished first, I thought it would be very appropriate for today. The last school I'm going to mention here today is TCU, who simply wasn't picked to merge with the Big 12 like the other schools not mentioned. They won the Southwest in 1929, 1932, 1938, 1944, 1951, 1955, 1958, 1959, and 1994. They also won the national title in 1935 and 1938. They were demoted to the WAC, moved to the CUSA in 2001, moved again to the Mountain West in 2005, and finally moved to the Big 12 in 2012. I might go more in depth about this in a future video, so I'll keep it relatively brief for now. But like SMU, it is nice to see a university pick themselves up after being deregulated. The final conference of the day is the Big East. For the sake of simplicity, I'll only be talking about the football members they had, as this is a very messy and convoluted conference with a very messy and convoluted history. The Big East I'll be talking about began football play in 1991 and disbanded in 2013, with various members going their own way. These 3 universities previously had football teams, actually 4 universities. However, they are no longer Power 5, except for the 4th, which I'll mention later. I'll mention 3 colleges from this conference that got demoted instead of promoted when the old Big East disbanded. The first is UConn, who won the Big East in 2010, and is now independent in football, and is in the new Big East in every other sport. The last 2 colleges of the day are USF and Temple. During their time in the Big East, neither team won the conference. South Florida never got higher than 4th, and Temple never got higher than 6th. Temple especially struggled, being in the bottom 2 almost every single year they were in this conference. Both teams left for the AAC and remain there today. And the 4th team I'll mention, I know, I said the previous year were the last, but this is actually the last, is Cincinnati. But they were technically out of the power conferences for less than 10 years, so I'm not going to go into super detail with them. Essentially, they left, still managed to go to the college football playoffs, and then after they did that, they were pretty much good enough to go back to a power conference. And that power conference is the Big 12. That's it. Every college. Of course, This wouldn't be a crispy maps video without maps to tie everything together. Please take this, enjoy, and you can download this for yourself in the link in the description. Thank you very much if you're still here, and stay crispy.